Well, thank you for coming to our mock talk, and I'm glad you all remembered it was a week later than usual. So the one I'm going to do today is about Rock Springs Park, with an emphasis on the early years and the commercial development of the park and kind of the park in its prime. For those of you that don't know anything about Rock Springs Park, which I don't think there's anybody here that doesn't, but it was an amusement park over in Chester, West Virginia. And during its heyday, they would have 20,000 people a day coming to that park. And they would hire up to 350 people there. So it was a big deal during its heyday. So we're going to start talking about the early years. I'm going to start with this guy, Patsy Kernan. John and Melvina Gardner owned the land that encompassed Rock Springs Park. And we know that as early as 1857, church groups were going over there for picnics. And by the 1870s, there was a regular crowd of people going over just for picnics and just enjoying the spring and the lush foliage in that valley. So, but by 1880, Patsy Kernan then leases that land. And Patsy's the wharf master here in East Liverpool. And so he operated this 93-foot boat called the Ollie Neville. And it was named for Captain John Neville's daughter, Olive. Captain John Neville actually drove the boat. Neville brought the boat up the river from Wheeling, and it served as the ferry boat over to Rock Springs Park. So you could ride the ferry boat for 10 cents, and then you had to pay another 10 cents to get into Rock Springs Park. Chester was called Southside at this time because it was on the south side of East Liverpool. And as you can see by the photograph, there's only a house or two in Chester at that time. This area over there with all the greenery and the countryside was a real break for the potters who were used to living in the city and dealing with the heat in the kilns and the dust of the pottery. They could go over to Chester and escape all that. Well, we went the wrong way here. There you go. So this is an early photograph of Rock Springs Park from a glass plate negative that we have here in our collection. This area was described by the paper as surrounded by beautiful scenery, a cool and in every way inviting retreat with the best of water in abundance. So this is a great picture that we just recently had printed to take a look at it. And Jen and I were talking earlier, you see the fence that's there? That fence was a really important thing in these pictures because we had photographs we didn't know where they were taken till this fence, some that we did know where they were taken because we could identify other things, had this fence in it. So that fence was a real clue to labeling a lot of these photographs. So the spring was always the focal point of the park. Ads for the park, even in the early 1880s, said that it flowed from a solid wall of rock. And we've all heard the legend of George Washington stopping with his men to get fresh water here. And that legend is probably true. We know from his journals that they stopped at Babb's Island. And probably people who traveled the river then knew that there was fresh water here. So it was probably common knowledge. So they probably did go here to get water. One of my postcards, and everything you're going to see in here is either from my collection or from the museum's collection. One of my postcards says on the back of it, it was sent to someone in Lisbon, and on the back of it says, flows like your Lisbon pump, but never needs pumping. So, and the spring is still there today. They've rerouted the spring, so it is between the highway, but it still exists. Mark's Run, which ran through the park, would flood on a regular basis. And many of our old pictures, some of the oldest pictures we have in this museum are either after a flood or after a fire. People like to photograph after tragedies. So even though this is an unusual picture, we actually just printed this one for the first time. And I was really fascinated with this. For one thing, we can date this picture pretty close in time between 1901 and 1906. Because by 1906, the park is much more developed than this. And 1901, TS&T was not there prior to 1901. So what you can see TS&T in the background there. So this is if you were looking towards East Liverpool from in there. So you can see a little pavilion there on the left, and that was a dance pavilion that they said they had made. You're going to see another shot of that in the meantime. Patsy Kernan left the park in 1893. He went to manage the Columbia Park in the East End here of East Liverpool, and L.J. McKee became the new manager. He did a few improvements. He added this dance pavilion, we believe, and he added a merry-go-round, which the paper said that it replaced the old merry-go-round. So Rock Springs Park had a number of merry-go-rounds. We don't know what kind of merry-go-round that was. We don't know if it was the kind you see in a playground that just goes around, or if it was a merry-go-round with actual horses on it. But there had been several there before the merry-go-round, we all know. As I said, the building in the back we think is a dance pavilion because that gets mentioned as being there.
Which building is that?
Can you see it? It's right here.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah, can you just,
I
yeah.
couldn't figure, but
I'm looking at the pictures, which is clear, and I will tell you that some of these pictures are from postcards, so they're a little pixelated they're a little fuzzy looking, but they're the best we could do with them. So, and again, you notice the fence that is there that helped us know where these pictures are from. Oops, utility. So this is a flood picture, a different one because there are leaves on the tree, so not the same time of year, but it's really from the other direction. This is from the East Liverpool area way looking back into the park, and you can see the same pavilion back here. So, but again, this is Mark's Run, and which later they would use to create the lake, using the water from Mark's Run. So, oh, I also wanted you to notice, if you can see it here, there's a cone-shaped fountain there that shows up, and actually I'm trying to remember, I'm not sure I put it in this slideshow, but that cone-shaped fountain stays there all through the history of the park and becomes different fountains over time. I think I do have a photograph. We'll see. So baseball was always a really popular activity here throughout the history of East Liverpool and the area. And we know that baseball was played at Rock Springs Grove, which it was called then before it was Rock Springs Park, as early as the 1880s. So most of you that remember the park, if you look at this, this is kind of the area right in front of Virginia Gardens, and you'll see it later. It's that nice flat area there. Later, the baseball field would move over more into the parking lot where the high school and the city building is now. So in May of 1899, the newspaper wrote, "The pleasure grounds are increasing in popularity yearly and were never in better shape than the present." And a few days later, the paper said that they were thinking about building a hotel there. It also said, "Rock Springs Grove was well patronized yesterday and the Ollie Neville did a good business." So the big changes were coming. Yes?
And that last picture, was that on the right-hand side,
Yes.
looking at it? Almost looks like,
It's a roller coaster.
Uh-huh.
It is a roller coaster. They had a series of different roller coasters there. And I think when McGee took over the park, it said that there was a roller coaster added. Yeah, so. And then I'm not sure what that other building is. I was trying to enlarge that today to see what that was, but I couldn't tell. Good question. Good. So we got big changes coming. 1896. Hello. I'll show you. Okay, we have people in here, and I don't think they can get through there. In 1896 was a really big year for the town. In 1893, J.E. McDonald, who was an attorney here in East Liverpool, announced that he would build a bridge to Chester. And 3 years later, he started that bridge. The bridge was built in 1 year, and it opened on New Year's Eve of 1896. That was the last day that the Ollie Neville operated. The day the bridge opened was the end of the Ollie Neville. So you can see part of the bridge being built here into Chester. If you wonder what happened to the Ollie Neville, the boat went up to Lake Erie and worked on the different trade routes up there until it sunk in 1905. So what does that mean for Rock Springs Grove? Well, J.E. McDonald did something that was happening all through the country. Entrepreneurs understood the popularity of the trolley lines. So J.E. McDonald secured a 25-year lease to run the trolley across the Chester Bridge. And he created a group called McDonald and Associates, who purchased 475 acres of land, and that land included Rock Springs Park. So other entrepreneurs are doing the same thing. It was a typical move. If they had control of a trolley, they built an amusement park at the end of the trolley line to give people someplace to go. And those parks became known as trolley parks. And Rock Springs Park is the perfect example of a trolley park. Many of you know another trolley park was Kennywood. Kennywood's history paralleled Rock Springs Park almost exactly. So the trolley made its first trip over on May 26, 1897, and the following day was Memorial Day, and that was the official opening of Rock Springs Park. And it's being developed now by J.E. McDonald. The newspapers reported that 5,000 people attended the park that day. It featured a dance pavilion that you see here, and 3 new roller coasters, which might have been the ones we saw in the last one. This is a dance pavilion, and it stood on the same spot that we'll see later where Virginia Gardens stands. Now, if you've ever done any research in the old newspapers, you'll know that reporters like to pad the numbers a lot. It seemed kind of coincidental to me that 5,000 people showed up and that this dance pavilion could hold 5,000 people. So anyway. So here you see the dance hall from the Carolina Avenue side of it, and you also see the trolley stop and a rest house there on the right. By 1900, C.A. Smith had gained controlling interest in the park. Smith's house remains an icon in Chester. You can see it here. It's now owned by the Fox family of Chester and houses the firm of True North. But under C.A. Smith's leadership, we're going to see the park just grow in leaps and bounds. One of the first improvements to the park was the creation of the Old Mill. It was also known as the Aquarama. It opened in 1903. The building was 68 feet by 250 feet, and inside featured 7 rooms, each one with a different historical scene, and it played music throughout. The front of the building represented an old water wheel, and it was with that it powered the boats that ran through the zigzag course throughout the building. The mill cost $15,000 to build. But on June 6, 1915, tragedy struck here at the Old Mill. Chester, Newell, East Liverpool, and Wellsville were holding their annual school picnic. It's estimated that 16,000 children were at the park that day. At 7 p.m., a fire broke out and resulted in the death of 4 students. Bystanders stated that flames suddenly sprang out of the entrance. The paper reported, while the rescue work was going on, thousands of people crowded about the place. Scores of women fainted, and pandemonium reigned in the red glare of the flames, which quickly burst through the lightly constructed building. The victims were Albert Rayner, age 12, of Chester, Eva Dales, and Glenda Stout. Eva was 14, Glenda was 17, of Newell. And Hyacinth Mackey, who was 15, also from Newell, was burned severely and died about 2 weeks later. Most of the people at the time believed the fire was caused by a malfunction of the dynamo, but C.A. Smith said it was caused by a discarded cigarette. And this was in the day long before litigation, so nothing ever came of this accident. The Old Mill, though, was such a popular ride that many years later, a lot of people attributed the downfall of the park to the loss of the Old Mill, because they never rebuilt the Old Mill. Other improvements at the time was a new entrance. It was added in 1903 at the cost of $2,500. One of my postcard messages, anybody who collects postcards, one of the fun things about doing them is to read what people wrote. And usually they're very short, brief messages. And generally they're just someone very local because, you know, this is pre-telephone and everything else. But this one was sent and said, "Free, once inside, nothing free but the air." The Summer Theater was also built in 1903. One of the newspaper ads at the time proclaimed that it would feature only refined vaudeville for 20 cents. So in the first year that the Summer Theater here, one of the guests to the Summer Theater was Carrie Nation. She appeared here. The paper said that this hatchet-wielding saloon smasher told the crowds that she was more opposed to cigarettes than liquor. And Carrie told them that God told her to go out and fight this battle. This is another one of our great photos from the glass plate negatives, and included it in this section of it because that sign is actually advertising something happening at the Summer Theater. And from piecing it together, we've got a girl standing right in front of it. I believe it says this: "Where are you going? All this week at Rock Springs Park Theater, John Daly's minstrel shows star the marvelous boy singer," and his name is blocked, so we don't know who he is. But he sang at 3 p.m. obviously. So the seating capacity of the Summer Theater was 1,400. In winter months, they would take these seats out and basketball would be played here. The theater was destroyed by a devastating fire in 1917 that also claimed the ice house and the bathhouse. So you remember this dance pavilion? This was the first one built by J.E. McDonald. But dancing was so popular at the turn of the century, they soon knew that they needed a larger building, even though this one was supposed to hold 5,000. So this one was built, and this is the casino. The casino opened on April 21st, 1906. It cost $30,000 to build. And on that first floor, you would find 6 lanes for bowling, a shooting gallery, restrooms, barbershop, and the park offices. So by the way, I've just learned this recently. I was traveling and saw another building called the casino. And in most of our locals, in our mind, that means gambling. Casino back in that time meant a house of amusement. And the casino is from the word casa, the Italian word casa for house. So it just simply meant a house for a pleasure activity and amusement. It's not necessarily gambling. So while you're looking at this, notice the arch-shaped windows on the second floor there. The second floor was devoted entirely to dancing. 18,000 square feet of white maple floor was waiting there for the couples, and it could accommodate 750 couples. The casino was also destroyed by fire. Certainly, fire was the nemesis of Rock Springs Park. In the first of several devastating fires there, that happened in 1914. When that fire happened, they immediately converted the Summer Theater into a dance hall. When the dance hall converted, they then announced they would build a new dance hall. So the management built this dance hall. It was completed in 1917. It was remodeled and enlarged in 1927 and christened Virginia Gardens after C.E. McDonald's daughter. Virginia would later go on to own Rock Springs Park along with her husband Robert. Many well-known performers performed here, especially during the 40s big band period. We saw big name entertainers like Guy Lombardo, Henry James, Paul Whiteman, Stan Kentman. This was really the place to go. Perhaps C.A. Smith's grandest endeavor was the creation of an artificial lake. It cost him $50,000 for this 3.5-acre lake, which was used for boating in the summer and ice skating in the winter. The original plans called for the lake to be no deeper than 3 feet, but if there was an area where it was to be deeper than that, it was to have a lattice work installed so that no one would ever sink down and drown. We were never able to determine if they actually did that, but we do know that several drownings over the years did occur in the lake, so it's doubtful that they did the lattice work thing. At the south end of the lake was an island surrounded by a 40-foot lagoon, and the walkway around there was called Lover's Lane. The northeast shore had a pool that was 170 foot long and 9 foot deep. It was completed in 1904. As a sign of the times they lived in, the Liverpool Tribune reported in their newspaper that colored picnickers were prohibited from swimming in this pool, but they were welcome to swim in the lake. The bathhouse was next to the pool. It held changing rooms and lockers as well, and you could rent a bathing suit for 10 cents. The Morning Tribune reported an interesting story. Said the rafters supporting the second floor of the bathhouse at Rock Springs Park gave way and dropped about 2 feet. The roof was crowded with people at the time who were watching a woman be rescued from near drowning in the pool. There's just another shot of it, and you can see you could rent the little boats to take out around, and then there was a regular excursion boat that would take people around as well, but you could rent boats. Although the lake was used for skating in the winter, It served a more practical purpose for the park as well. Usually in January, the ice harvest would begin. When the ice was about 8 inches thick, the park would hire a large number of workers to come in. They would build chutes down the bank you see here. They would cut the ice into large chunks and slide it down the chutes. And then the ice would be stored in the summer theater, under the summer theater, and in an ice house that was there. That ice would be packed in sawdust, and that's what they used to manufacture and preserve ice cream for the parks during the summer. Here's just a little bit later picture of the pool with some people in it. And you can't see it on this, but I like the sign there says no spitting. First sign of spring signaled the opening of Rock Springs Park were all the gardeners coming to the park to mow, trim, and plant. In 1906, the park announced a train carload of flowers and 30,000 shrubs were being planted throughout the park. Now, when I think of Rock Springs Park, I think of it as having 2 levels. And the lower level was the part where at that time was the main entrance, the spring and the lake, and the pavilions for picnickers. The upper level is where all the amusements were. And that's what you're looking at now. And after the advent of the automobile, when a parking lot was added, the baseball field was taken out for the parking lot, the main entrance pretty much became on the upper level as well. This is a view that would be taken, it looks like from the top of the dance hall out at the park. And by the looks of the clothing in the pictures, the dance hall at that time might have been Virginia Gardens. It looks like this is a little later postcard. I pointed this area out to you before when you saw the baseball field. This is where baseball was played in the 1880s or so. This flat area, though, in later years was really where a lot of the gardens were and the flower beds, and it was a really pretty part of the park. All of the postcards you see are really black and white photos that have been tinted. So even tinted to look like they were taken at night. So this is certainly not a night shot. I have the day shot of this, but I probably should have put it in here too. But it's just made it look like it's after dark. Throughout the park, there were lily ponds and fountains. And a lily pond just inside this gate. It was a scene of another tragic accident here at the park. In September of 1912, Alfred Winkle, age 7, and he had another companion with him, Harold Smith. They were catching goldfish in the pond when Winkle put his thumb in one of the overhead light sockets and was electrocuted. Coroners feel that the current wasn't enough to have killed him, but that they think that he fell into the pond and actually drowned in the 18 inches of water. Park managers had this to say about that accident. Let me see if I can get that to go down here. Get to my notes a little bit. The park company was not aware that the wires were loaded, the switches having been removed several days ago, and they are lost to account for the presence of electricity. And that was that. So the Scenic Railroad was built in 1906 at the cost of $35,000. C.A. Smith was another character who liked to exaggerate his claim that the ride paid for itself in the first year at 5 cents a ride. Probably isn't true. But this is an interesting ride in that it's completely gravity operated. As you see in this house, the cars through that spiraled down and then took a mile-long ride throughout the grounds. Don't confuse the Scenic Railway with the roller coasters. They were separate. There was a Leap the Dips, and then we all remember, of course, the Cyclone that was there at the end. Another popular ride was a Shoot the Chutes. It was built in 1906 and cost $20,000 to build. There were 12 boats that would be pulled up that hill with a chain trolley operated by a 65 horsepower engine. And then they were just literally let loose to slide down the 700-foot slide. This postcard shows the end of the chutes, where the boat would skip across a 200-foot long pool. The lady standing in the boat is not real, but she has been rather added by an artist at a later date than the picture. But here you see also a nice picture of the casino in the background and the carousel pavilion, which we'll talk about in a minute. Talking about all of these are black and white photographs that are tinted So here we see, same photograph, different artist. So they can look quite different. This photo shows one of those early carousels at Rock Springs Park. And we don't know too much about those carousels. What we do know is that in 1906, they announced that Finley Brothers Construction Company began work on a new carousel house. And that is the one that most of us remember. It was 65 feet high and 90 feet in diameter. And it was built to house the new Coney Island model carousel. The old carousel, it stated, probably the one we just saw in that other building, was shipped to Mexico. In these carousel houses, which were very common in parks, children could ride these galloping steeds as their parents could sit in benches around inside, out of the sun, and wait for the children. It wasn't until 1927 that the carousel most of us remember was purchased for the park. So the pavilion was built for a different carousel, and in 1927, the Denzel model carousel comes here. It has been said that it is the last carousel to have left the Denzel factory. And since it was made in 1927, we do know that William Denzel died in 1928, and he was the manager of that factory. So it is likely true. William had taken over management from his very famous carousel carver Gustav Denzel in 1909, and he soon got the nickname of Hobby Horse Bill. So he hired the Muller brothers in 1918, and he put Daniel Muller in charge of the carving department. And Daniel Muller is the name of Daniel Muller carved horses are the ones that everyone wants. It was during this time period then that the Rock Springs Park carousel was made. So anyway, the carousel was purchased by Jim Wells of Fairfax, Virginia. And I'm going to tell you about it in just a little bit. I'm going to move ahead just a second to look at my notes here. Okay. We'll just stick with this one here. So this is a picture of the horses where you can see the different rows on them. The one thing about the Rock Springs Park carousel, it never had the menagerie. It didn't have the giraffes and the different ones. It had all horses, 48 Arabian horses on it. So in 1983, when this decal done by Hans Hacker showed up on the Pottery Festival plates, the description on the back of that plate says that the location of the carousel is now unknown. I happened to be working here at the museum at that time, and that just got me very curious about where the carousel went. So I went back to the newspapers at the time of the auction. The auction was in 1974. And learned that Jim Wells of Fairfax, Virginia purchased the carousel. At the time, Wells owned and operated a carousel that was operating in the Smithsonian. He was accompanied at the auction by a representative of the Smithsonian, who at one point stated that they were going to buy the carousel. But he didn't have the authorization to do so, so that didn't happen. But that is probably why many of us, the rumors started that the carousel was in the Smithsonian. Because at the time period when I was looking, that's what most people believed, that the carousel had gone to the Smithsonian. So, this is pre-internet days, and I called directory assistance and found a Jim Wells in Fairfax, Virginia, and thought there's probably dozens of Jim Wellses. I got the right one. So that was just, to me, amazing. And he told me that he bought the carousel, he disassembled it and loaded it into 2 storage vans and left Chester with it. He then sold it to Mike Roberts of Mike Roberts Color Productions in Berkeley, California. And so he gave me Mike Roberts' phone number. I amazingly was able to reach Mike Roberts as well. And he told me that he in turn sold it to Marriott Corporation, the nationally known hotel chain. At that time, Marriott had the Great America Park in Santa Clara, California, a big amusement park, and they had plans to make other amusement parks like that throughout the country. Well, those plans fell through, so they ended up then selling the horses to the Friels Foundation. So I located the Friels Foundation and called Larry Friels, who was the president of the Friels Foundation. Larry Friels had no provenance information about the carousel. He had no idea that it came from Chester, West Virginia. So he was very excited to talk to me. We exchanged pictures, this one including, because there was a book put out by the Fraleys that had this on the inside cover and a picture of the Rock Springs Park horse in it, and both of them said location unknown. So we talked until we realized that yes, we were talking about the same carousel. So their plans, because were creating a carousel museum in San Francisco, was to have this one operate outside on the lawn and let children ride it. Well, soon preservationists told them that was not a good idea because they said it had original paint, still had original paint. We know that that's not true. In 1937, they repainted this carousel, but they had the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, which was a very reputable carousel carving factory as well, painted it. So when they say it hasn't been painted, they mean it hasn't had park paint. And park paint can be defined as the fluorescent paint that the maintenance man put on it. So it had been painted, but it had been professionally painted. But they did then decide to operate the carousel inside the museum, which they did for about 10 years. After that, I noticed that they were going up for auction. The Friels Foundation had told me they would never separate the horses and never sell them. So I made a call to Larry Friels, and he said because they separated them and they sent some of them out on for temporary exhibits at different museums. As a matter of fact, they went to Sandusky, Ohio, to the Carousel Museum there, and I made a trip up to see them when they were there. He said at the time they were going to keep some of the better ones and sell the lesser horses. And as far as I can tell, though, I think since that time they have sold all the horses. The museum has closed, and I don't know if the Friels Foundation even exists any longer. But I do believe that all the horses have now been sold. So. The most coveted of those horses was this one, and it's called the Military Mauler. And it was carved by Daniel Mauler in the Denzel factory. And it's an authentically carved Civil War cavalry horse. So unlike a lot of the carousel horses that were made just to be pretty, this one was very realistic. This horse broke all records when it was sold in 1988. The editor of Carousel magazine wrote this: although with each auction in the late 1980s, prices keep creeping up, I believe it was the Mauler Standard from Rock Springs Park that was the first horse to really push the envelope, so to speak, going for a world record auction price of a whopping $63,500 in the spring of 1988. At that time, it broke the previous record for another Rock Springs Park Mauler horse, which sold in the high 50s. Since then, horses have sold for more than that. But this, again, if this horse would go on the market again, it would still take top dollar. So, past the Carousel House was the Midway, or the Promenade, which featured the food booths, the penny arcade, shooting galleries. There was a fun house called Dr. Joy's Cure for the Blues. At one time, there was a small zoo at the end of the promenade. Another view of the promenade on an obviously busy day. A 1909 paper said that there was always a crowd, but it was never crowded. So here we see a photograph of a very prosperous park. So while you look at this, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what happened to that park. A lot of people have said that it was the invention of the automobile that was the decline of the park. But what happened to the park happened before the automobile, before everyone owned automobiles. In 1912, the Central Passenger Association rescinded all Pennsylvania excursion rates. To understand what that meant, prior to that time, it cost 55 cents to ride from Pittsburgh to Chester. And by 1930, it cost $2.50. So for a family of four, it would be $10 to get the ride to Chester. And one after another, previously scheduled outings to the park began to cancel. The newspapers ran daily headlines in this area that said, "Smash the anti-excursion rates." Rock Springs Park and other parks like Conneaut and Kennywood appealed to the ICC. to make them restore the excursion rates. The newspaper said this: the excursion rates never fail to leave a great deal of money in the coffers of local merchants. So when those excursion rates were good for the economy here, not just the park, but they almost always visit all the pottery outlets while they were here too. So, but by July 13th, an issue in our paper, the headline said on the Islarical Review, the ICC ruled against picnickers, saying that they did not have the power to compel the railroad to restore the rates. At the close of the 1913 season, the park announced the poorest season the park has ever experienced in a financial way. So the loss of the excursion rates didn't defeat the park, but it certainly perhaps set different goals for the park. It seems that from that sort of time forward, the park's goal was to be a small, nice park serving more the local clientele. In 1925, C.C. McDonald becomes the new manager, and by 1950, Virginia and Robert Hand, of Virginia Gardens, purchased the park. The park maintained a humble but profitable existence until its closing on Memorial Day, 1970. The park announced its closing was due to the health of Robert Hand, or to the death of Robert Hand. Sorry. It was then sold to the West Virginia Department of Highways, and in 1974, all remaining structures at the park sold for $5,200. But you know, the park lives on in many ways. A lot of it in the memories of the older adults here that remember going. It lives on in our photo albums where we see pictures like this of our ancestors really at in the tri-state area. And many local people collect postcards and other memorabilia of the park. Everything you've seen in this is either from my collection of postcards or the museum's. So there's still a lot out there that exist for those that are interested. And everybody has a story about the park. Whether it's how frightened you were in riding the Cyclone here. Cyclone was designed by Harry Baker, who also designed the one at Coney Island. I wasn't allowed to ride, I was forbidden, but we did. Don't tell my mom. No, I think she found out. So, or if it was dancing to the big bands at Virginia Gardens in the 40s, which brought in all those big name performers. Everybody of a certain age went to a school picnic there because you got tickets in your report card. And I remember going to Globe Bricks annual picnic there, and the Potteries held yearly picnics at the park. Teens in the 60s went to Virginia Gardens for the Red Raven Club and saw bands such as Tommy James and the Shondells. So those things still are good memories that people around here have. The park is also remembered in other ways. We have the Virginia Gardens gazebo in Chester, and two of the carousel horses are in the area, one in Chester City Hall and one here at the Lou Holtz. And we plan to do our share of memorializing the park by having an exhibit that's going to open August 1st about the park. So the empty cases that you see throughout will be filled with a lot of the memorabilia for the park. Most of it from the collection of Bill and Donna Gray, who have a really awesome collection of things from the park. And we're also going to hold the Virginia Gardens Gala. If you haven't heard about our gala, I'm ending with a commercial here. Our gala is going to be August 17th. Write it on your calendar. We're very excited about it. It's going to be held out in the street. We've got a tent rented and chairs, and it's going to be upscale with tablecloths and centerpieces, and Lou Cassini's band, the Vince Villanova band. It's going to play 40s dance music for the first 3 hours. Then we're going to switch to DJs, two local girls from Chester. I think it's appropriate these people are from Chester. Natalie Hall and Sarah, what's Sarah's last name? Right, thank you. I know her maiden name. Are putting together the music you would have heard in the 50s and 60s at Virginia Gardens, along with some bits of information about who played there during that time. We think it's going to be a wonderful night. We hope you'll buy tickets. They're on sale right now out of our gift shop. So mark it on your calendar. We hope you'll come to that. And that's going to be the highlight of, it's going to be our big fundraiser of the year, but it's sort of the highlight of our Rock Springs Park exhibit that will run till we close in December. So that concludes my presentation. Any comments, questions, memories? Yes.
Virginia Gardens had their last dance 74?
74.
Yes.
You want to tell them anything about it? You were very active with that, right, in planning
I was
that?
on the committee.
Yeah.
Well, there was no electricity there.
No,
No, what did you
So I
get?
was in the Army Reserve.
Oh,
in
yes.
Weirton, and a number of us volunteered to grab all the generators. How we got permission from the Army, I don't remember. But we brought all the
Dave
generators up by
Wilson.
truck. Yes.
Dave Wilson.
And Jack,
I knew they got generators, but I never knew this. Yeah.
they came from the Army Reserve in Weirton,
Mhm.
Okay.
and they conned us into running them. And we were all supposed to wear tuxes.
Oh, my.
And wearing a tux trying to keep a generator going was not the thing to do. So we were allowed to wear our Army clothes.
Okay.
And I don't know how long we stayed there till, when did it end? Midnight, 1 o'clock?
It was supposed to be 12 and people wouldn't leave, so they kept extending.
Yeah.
So we were there half.
There were
the
over
night.
1,000 people there that night. That's just
Wow.
amazing.
It was just so fun.
Yeah, because I don't think Virginia Gardens held 1,000 people.
Just a little aside.
Yeah,
That was the
it's a
most
good start.
important thing because just a few days before that, we found we couldn't get the electricity because we thought the power company
We do.
was going to do
Uh-huh.
something and we found out. So they had to send somebody to Charleston, some kind of permit, even the day before. But the Army saved us, the Army Reserve.
That is fun. That's really interesting.
Well,
That's
somehow
a
the
good story.
powers that be, it was the 99th Army Reserve Command in Oakdale.
Yeah, that's where Dave was.
That's how they got the permission to do it.
If they
I don't think they could do that now.
I'm just going to say, it would take much longer than 2 weeks to do that
Amy
today.
Figley.
Oh, yeah.
Amy Figley, she's the one, her son-in-law was in the reserve in Oakdale.
That was the headquarters.
Yeah.
And he knew someone who knew someone.
I knew someone, yeah.
And so it went, yeah.
We didn't know.
And this park has really such a rich history. I mean, this presentation could be hours long to talk
We
about
could.
all the things that happened there and different owners and different developments. And
Did people wear tuxes for the dance?
they were dressed up.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
well, we were really dressed, I guess, maybe long dresses, but that was the era of.
Yeah, it was
Sure.
in style then, yeah.
Long dresses too, about everything.
Yeah.
It was-
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking at some old pictures and Mrs. Com here is in a lot of them, of the last dance as it was called, yeah.
Prom dresses to the August thing. Don't push your luck.